So my presentation today is on my doctoral research. I'm just presenting a piece of this. It's a concordance analysis that I did of aesthetics and aesthetic themes as they appear in cartographic textbooks over about the past 100 years. So I'm going to talk to you today about corpus, linguistics, and concordance analysis. Then I'm going to provide an extremely brief genealogy of aesthetics in Euro-American cartographic textbooks. And lastly, I'm going to discuss how aesthetic language in cartography constructs the aesthetics of cartography. So lots of things to cover today. Before I begin, I'm going to just offer a brief introduction to philosophical aesthetics. This is the short answer to what is this that comes from the Oxford English Dictionary: perception, appreciation, criticism of that which is beautiful. Sounds rather abstract. So shorter answer is really good maps. So when we see a map and we think like this is good, like that map just has that something special to it. That is what that's an aesthetic experience. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about philosophical aesthetics and aesthetics in cartography. There's a problem with this, though, because aesthetics as a concept is so vague, and because there's just a lot of misunderstanding of aesthetics. There's lots of words that get conflated with aesthetics and cartography, such as design, style, taste, art, beauty. They tend to be used synonymously with aesthetics and muddy the waters a little bit. So when I'm approaching this, trying to understand how aesthetics has appeared within cartography, I found a method to help disambiguate and understand these terms, and I turned to corpus linguistics. And this is interesting because it bears a relationship to some of the methods that we saw earlier for understanding meaning and how concepts come from. This one is an approach coming from linguistics. You can see language change over time, and so it's really suitable for extremely large corpuses. So concordance analysis is the specific method. You extract concordances or segments of text that contain an instance of language use. It's really helpful because it's grounded to the text. It's also easy to share results, to perform statistical analyses. But most of all, you can actually compare different corpora together. So you could look at the English language usage of aesthetics using a standardized corpus by linguistics, through the field of linguistics. You could compare it to a smaller or an individualized corpus, such as one of cartographic textbooks, or perhaps you're interested in studying the scientific publications in America in like the 1970s. So there's all of these like in-group, out-group comparisons of concepts and language use that you can do, which enables you to ask all sorts of interesting questions. There are some caveats. Because it's grounded to the text, that can be a problem. Not all language use is written language use. It requires digitized texts. And you need a really good selection method. You need a really good way that you're forming a corpus. And so when I formed a corpus, I selected 21 textbooks. I segmented them by Arthur Robinson's career because of his outside influence on cartographic pedagogy. And so I used actually 3 different selection methods to form my textbook corpus because of the differences in the way that knowledge is indexed and understood over time. So for what I call the pre-Robinson era, I actually did a citation chain using the 2 leading textbooks, Elements of Cartography First Edition and General Cartography by Irwin Royce, which was the other leading textbook, seeing which citations they had in common to trace knowledge back in time. Then I used journal articles, which had surveys on textbook adoption in the United States to try to capture a representative sample coming from what I call the Robinson era, which is when textbooks were published. So the first to the last editions of Elements of Cartography. It ran through 6 editions, 1953 to 1995. And then in the more modern era, well, now we have, these very elaborate citation tools. So I used Google Scholar citations to select my works. But of course, that sample, there's a lot of elisions there, right? So non-Euro-American authors are not part of my sample. Works that are not in the privileged language English. People who are not white males don't have a lot of representation in this corpus. Women are largely, have been invisible in much of cartographic history. In the United States, teaching was a women's profession. Only 2 out of 21 of my textbooks were written by women. That's less than 10%. So cartographic aesthetics in this analysis largely represents a white male Euro-American perspective, centering Robinson. So that's also why I call it a genealogy. To select keywords, I picked my primary word of interest, which was aesthetic, and its verb-like synonym taste. And I also selected a number of aesthetically charged words, often conflated with aesthetics. These came from my literature review, but my discriminating quality, so why I picked one word over another is by repetition. So more attestations tend to mean that a concept is more important and it's containing more meaning. There's a reason that one word is being used rather than another. But frequently other important words that may be familiar to cartographers, like clarity, those often showed up as collocates. So I wanted to look at all instances of the use of these keywords in the corpus rather than just look at one variant. So what you see here is a lemma aesthetic, and then you see all the inflected forms of aesthetic. And so I actually picked up all of these within my analysis. I had a massive amount of words that I dealt with, 1.5 million, which I scanned, processed, and corrected. And so you can actually see what some of the text recognition errors looked like. That's an image, so I had to fix all of that to ensure a clean corpus to try to pick up as much as possible. So I retrieved and analyzed a total of 3,767 101 word concordances, which was 50 words on either side of my keyword of interest. What you actually see is the concordance of design there. And by the way, for the amount of text that was retrieved that I parsed here, that was 1,500 pages, so lots and lots of coding. And I coded all of these manually. So you can see an example of like, well, what did this look like? So this is design as it appears as a singular noun. And you can see modifiers on the left and on the right, and that's sorted by parts of speech. So I could also use the data to account for grammatical variations, different kinds of expressions, sorting, filtering, playing with the data. It's super cool. If you're interested in this, I can give you the files. You can play around with this yourself. I'm now going to move into an extremely brief genealogy of aesthetics in Euro-American cartography. And so aesthetic language gives cartographers an evaluation. It gives cartographers reasons to make decisions, and it changes. It changes over time as maps are evaluated differently over time. And so this is just a broad view of what my findings were. I'm going to point out just a couple of things. So you can see in the pre-Robinson era, design, that's the black part of the bar, that's actually not the dominant word that is used in the corpus. Instead, they referred to style. So style was the most common way that folks were talking about aesthetic considerations. And as you can see, design kind of explodes during the Robinson era, and especially in the post-Robinson era. And briefly, can anybody guess like what might have been going on between 1995 to 2009? Like, why do you think there might have been that massive increase in the use of the word design?
The internet.
Yeah, the internet is definitely one. And what might have been going on outside of cartography? Yeah. that, and also the introduction and explosion of GIS. So what you actually can see here is a little bit of signposting that's going on of cartography's identity, starting to really repeat that word design, 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 because that was one of the things that made cartography unique. You also can notice, too, that the other aesthetic language starts going away. You see that these have a very sharp decrease in usage. However, I found that the meanings that were associated with these keywords, those didn't totally vanish. So instead, I found that design and aesthetics, so the usage of both of these words, actually expanded, and they started forming a lot of new noun phrases. And those new noun phrases had meanings that were previously associated with other aesthetically charged words, such as beauty, style, taste, and art. And so more objective ways of discussing these terms, those tended to be associated with design, and I'll show you kind of what that looked like in a couple of slides. And more subjective meanings, those tended to be applied to aesthetic, but they became increasingly more vague. So here's an example of some of those transferred meanings. So you start seeing something like taste, like is this mapped to one's taste? Now we're referring to this in the terms of guidelines. So is this to the taste of cartography? Design possibilities, professional design. You start seeing beauty now in discussions of clarity, efficiency, effectiveness, quality. Art is actually an interesting case. If there's time in the Q&A, you can ask me about that one. And terms like type style became typeface design. So even style started dropping away from that usage as well. And again, so some of those meanings that were just really hard to capture objectively, those were assigned to aesthetic. And typically these would appear and there would be no explanation really given. So it would just say aesthetically poor or poor aesthetic quality, aesthetic matter, but then nothing else would be provided. There's no explanation, there's no clarification. And for that reason, it's not really giving you a reason to act aesthetically. So you don't really have anything that you can do with that knowledge compared to words like design that are giving you specific actions that you can take to make a really good map. So it's providing, design is now providing very specific reasons to act. That accounts for why we start seeing much more design language within cartography. It's not subjective. It's not a word like beautiful, which is basically amounting to good or bad. And especially in the context of writing a textbook, and you're trying to present the principles of a discipline, you're providing the values that you're wishing to reproduce in your practitioners. This is very important. It also makes it for something that's easier to understand, or signposting the identity of a discipline, which was very important, again, in response to challenges from fields like GIS. And so my last point here is that aesthetic language constructs aesthetics in cartography, whether or not we realize that we're using aesthetic language, but it also constructs the aesthetics of cartography as a discipline. So objective modifiers given to design help create the aesthetics of objectivity, science, and technology within cartographic textbooks. And so you see some variants that I'm highlighting here in terms of things that we associate with cartographic design. But that begs the question, is this it? So are these the only reason-giving meanings that our language is able to handle? And is this what we want the aesthetics of cartography to be? Do we want to expand our language? And so I will leave you with that. Thank you very much. I look forward to taking your questions, and we can also open it to questions from everybody from this session. And please, yeah, so go right ahead, and that's it. That's all I've got for you. Thank you.
On the map image itself, I didn't crop it. It
Right.
just doesn't have a
Okay.
title.
Okay.
And some maps do have titles and some maps don't have titles. Oftentimes you'll actually observe that, like, if you go to like a map library, and you look at what they use for their alt text, it's invariably just the title
Okay.
of the map. So definitely the title has some importance in influencing the accessibility descriptions that exist now. And I do think that the title gives important clues to the content, particularly if we're thinking about maps from a communication perspective. That's a key signifier of the intent of the message of the map that the cartographer is trying to convey. So, yeah, if you're thinking about maps from other perspectives, maybe the title is less important if you're thinking about it as a source of geographical information to mine, because they're what.
Well, I'm thinking of better titles.
Yeah.
Can we write better titles?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right. I'm going to go and actually, I'm going to go in the back. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank
Yeah.
you. This question for you, Chelsea.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you for your analysis, and I would love to see that data set.
Yeah.
I especially want to thank you because it's the first time I looked at the word design in a way that looks like design.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It's a really interesting way
Yep.
of thinking what the semiotics are
Yep.
and what the word conveys. I guess I'm wondering if you may provide us some glimmer of hope for the word design, and if it's possible you come across more subjective ways of interpreting it and use cases that are beyond your basic conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. And I would say that the secret is that it really is all subjective, right? Because a lot of this, it's all about in how you're choosing to frame things to then provide a basis of measurement, right? So, like, one of the things that like I'm looking to do with my research is to just kind of strike more of a balance. Like, let's put in the and start being more inclusive in how we're thinking about design. And I actually found writing this talk to be extremely challenging to like keep this at like this, very broad overview, because there are so many interesting things. And one of the things I think would be really interesting is like you'll have words like artistic design, for instance, but we're not really sure what that is. And understanding, and this is where I'm leading towards, is that a word like art, for instance, because it is subjective, like it keeps getting pushed further and further and further away until like the very end of the map design process, and it's something that is like we apply at the end to art. Okay, we're going to apply this. And now we do the art part of it. Like, we've already established like the scientific bona fides of our map through following all of the appropriate practices for handling data. But like one of the things that if we start thinking about, well, how can we be thinking about design in the context of the data itself? Maybe we start thinking about design process, and we start maybe breaking down like some of the distinctions that which are sometimes quite useful between like something like GIS and something like design, and something like the analytical process and something like design, and just kind of thinking about a more integrated way of how these things can work together. And that's where aesthetics is really beneficial, and something like semiotics can be a little bit more challenging, because semiotics tends to break things up into pieces. So kind of getting towards that holistic view on mapping and on design is something that I think is totally possible, but it requires an expansion of our vocabulary. It requires more ways to talk about things, and I think a little bit more understanding of the place of many places of aesthetics in cartography, and kind of being aware when we're talking about aesthetic matters, because our vocabulary is very good at helping us not realize that we're talking about, at least in part, about aesthetics when we're talking about map design. So I hope that answers your question. Cindy?
So Judy Heiner and I are here.
Yeah?
Are we the two women?
Yes, you are. You are. So I'm going to give you a hand. Thank you. You are both so thank you so much.
That's the end of the question, but I wondered if you're different, like in the data set.
Yes.
Are we different?
Yes, you are. You're different, and special. So, so yes, very much appreciated. Especially with design. I mean, that's designing better maps. So absolutely, and thinking through the ways we do this. Yes. So. But we can talk more afterward. I could show you the data. You want to see how your books compare? Talk to me afterward. I'll show you. We can actually look at the way you use language and the way others do too, because that data's there. I got it. So
You guys should know that Cindy's self-published book.
Designing Better Maps is out now this month, and I haven't seen it yet. I've got my draft sitting on the table. That's the last thing I corrected, but I haven't seen it.
The next edition is out
Ah.
now.
Yeah. Chat GPT jumped in.